The New York Giants have some big decisions on the horizon that could be dropping as soon as Monday. I'll give you the latest on what I've heard and then some coming up next on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Trainer, credential member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find all my written work. And as always, welcome on into my Blue Crew community members, to my newcomers, to my everydayers, and everybody in between. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And today's episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use the promo code LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. Prize Picks, run your game. All right, Giant fans, on today's Locked On Giants podcast. All right, there's one more game to go this weekend in Philadelphia. And look, if I'm being honest with you, it's a game that, I'm going to tune into because I have to. I've got to write about it. I've got to pod about it. But for me, the biggest storyline for the Giants is what's going to come after the game. So I want to talk a little bit, kind of give you a preview, if you will, for what I anticipate might happen on Monday. All right. I'll tell you some of what I've been hearing, what I think makes sense, and how I see this going. Now, heads up, some of you might not like what I have to say. I guess I just spoiled it for you, but just hear me out on this. All right. This is not necessarily what I would do. This is not necessarily something that I would agree with. I'm just giving you what I see happening. Okay, so I'm going to kind of give you a little overview, if you will. Then in segment 2, I want to discuss something that we wrote about over on New York Giants on SI. I know it's been floating out there. I believe Adam Schefter of ESPN initially put it out there, and that's this belief that maybe the Giants might trade for JJ McCarthy, make a trade with the Minnesota Vikings. And I'm going to tell you what I think of that possibility and what I think the Giants will actually do at quarterback besides maybe draft a quarterback. So we'll talk about that in segment 2. And then we'll wrap things up in segment 3 with a few locker room nuggets. I was in the locker room today, as always, went around, visited with several players, and I'll just share with you a little bits and pieces. Some of it you may know, some of it you might not know. So I figure I would share all that with you. I was going to originally post some of the audio that I did with some of the players, and I still might do that next week. But, I didn't have video to go with it. So unfortunately, I just said, let me just summarize it for you and we'll go that route. So anyway, that's our show for today. Again, welcome on into everybody. Let's get started. Let's talk about after the season, because really the big storyline for the Giants is, what will ownership do regarding Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll? Now, I've been saying all along, I think Joe Schoen is safe. But in order to ensure that he is safe, he has to go to ownership if he hasn't already done so. And I believe he has had initial meetings with ownership. I don't know how far it's gotten or, how detailed, but Schoen basically needs to go to ownership with a viable plan to get the franchise back on track. Now, it's interesting here, folks, because Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll, they have always been joined at the hip, right? They go in together. They're usually on the same page with everything. And from what I understand, they present their ideas together. They're basically hand in hand, if you will, when it comes to how the franchise needs to shape up. I don't believe that has been the case this time around. Okay, so that would, if my information is correct, that would sort of indicate that they are not a package deal. Even though I think they should be a package deal, because you don't want to bring another head coach in, for example, or another GM and then put them on the different timelines. It doesn't make sense to me. All right. So Joe Shane basically needs to present what the plan is for the franchise going forward. So amongst the plan, obviously, what they're going to do at quarterback, that's going to be a big one. Okay. Because let's face it, folks, the quarterback situation was a disaster this year. It was something they tried to address last offseason. We saw that in Hard Knocks. They weren't able to do so. So if you're looking for Joe Shane's biggest piece of evidence, if you will, as to why he should retain his job, he could say, look, let's go back to the before the draft. I told you my plan was to get the quarterback if we could move up, and if we could, we would pivot and take the receiver to help the offense. So all along, ownership, I've been telling you that I wanted to address the quarterback. We weren't able to do so because New England wasn't able to trade or didn't want to trade with us. We couldn't move ahead of Arizona. We missed out on our guy, and I didn't want to force a pick. That to me is probably going to be one of Joe's biggest arguments in his favor. The other thing in his favor will be the 2024 draft class. All right. He could say, well, look, I got Malik Neighbors. I've got you now an RB1 in Tyrone Tracy. I got you starting safety in Tyler Newman. I got you a kid in Darius Mawaso, who we thought was just going to be a special teamer. And look at how well he's played. Theo Johnson, he's a staple moving forward. Drew Phillips has been a stud for us. So that was a draft class I think we can all agree Joe Shane knocked out of the park. So he's going to use that as evidence. And as far as, the two prior classes, he could turn around and say, okay, Evan Neal, yeah, we still, the jury's still out on him at tackle. Maybe we move him inside. Kayvon Thibodeau, maybe he doesn't have the eye-popping numbers, but look at what he's been able to do with Brian Burns, the addition of Brian Burns. So in other words, folks, I think there's enough arguments there for Joe Shane to make to convince ownership that, yes, stay with me and I'll get this franchise right. I've got, I forget how much it is off the top of my head. I want to say about $50 million in cap space. I can address some of the most glaring holes where we could definitely use, a veteran player to come in, for example, cornerback, just hypothetically speaking. I can get this fixed. I just need more time. I think that's going to save Joe Shane, which is why I've been saying this all along. Now, again, this is what I think is going to happen, not what I personally want to happen. I personally don't have a horse in this race, believe it or not. If Joe stays, and I like Joe, I'll be happy. If they move on from him, then, it is what it is. So I'll still be here and I'll still be covering this team and all, the offseason moves. All right, now let's talk about Brian Daboll. Brian Daboll is also going to need to come in with a plan for ownership. So his plan is going to be a little different because he can't necessarily piggyback off of what Joe is doing. To an extent he can, but to an extent he can't. All right, so what are the things he's going to probably need to meet with ownership with? And by the way, this is just my guess here, but with Daboll being busy all week planning for Philadelphia, I would not be surprised if maybe that meeting with ownership begins maybe the night before the Philly game. I could see that being a possibility. I don't necessarily think that it's going to happen full blast on Monday because usually after once the season wraps up, the head coach and the GM will talk together. We do not have a media schedule for Monday, so I don't know what the plan is, but I would not be surprised if the two men maybe talk separately pending what their fate's going to be, but we'll find out, obviously. All right. So what does Daboll need to tell ownership to save his backside? There are a few things. All right. And this is why I think Daboll has a little bit more of an uphill battle than Joe Shane. Obviously, the coaching situation, I think he's going to lose Mike Kafka. Mike Kafka, I found out by the way, Kafka is under contract for another year, which I should have realized because when they gave him the bump up and the promotion this past offseason, they technically added on another year to his contract. So he is under contract, but we'll see if he stays. Dable, of course, says, yeah, I want him to stay, but I think if Kafka gets an offer somewhere, they're not going to hold him back. Shane Bowen obviously is going to be a topic of conversation, but you can make the argument that Shane Bowen, as good as his Tennessee Titans run defense was, he didn't have all the personnel that he had down there with the Giants. I mean, he basically had Dexter Lawrence and who else? Nobody, right? So he could make that. But the biggest thing for Dable is going to be the offense and particularly the quarterback situation. So what is the plan at quarterback? Now, Dable, if you look at the last couple of years, he is like continuity. So in other words, even though the whole quarterback room might get ripped up, he likes to have a guy in the room that is familiar with the system. All right. So does that mean, okay, hey, look, we're going to keep Tommy DeVito because he's an exclusive rights free agent and he knows the system, and we'll keep him until we redo the room? Does it mean Drew Lock stays because Lock, if Lock has another strong game, do they keep him? It's a possibility. I do think the Giants are going to want a bridge quarterback, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit in the next segment, but that's going to be a topic. Another topic is going to probably be, what is Dable going to do about play calling next year? This year, it didn't work. But Dable's argument is, well, look at what I did last week when I had competent quarterback play. So yeah, me calling the play, it can work. Just if we get a good quarterback in here, I can make this offense look like it did last week against the Colts. All right. So that's why maybe that Colts game was a little bit of a saving grace for Brian Dable. Some of Dable's processes obviously need to change. I've been screaming about now for 2 years about how he doles out preseason snaps. That's got to change because this team 2 years in a row has not looked ready coming out of the gate. So these are just some of the things that I suspect are going to be on the table for discussion between Dable and between ownership. And again, I do think both men are going to be evaluated separately. They're going to meet with ownership separately, as should be the case, because even though they're kind of joined at the hip, they're not. Each man has his own responsibilities, and you can't say that Dable failed because of Shane, just like you can't say that Shane failed because of Dable. They have to be judged separately. And that's how I think it's going to play out. Now, on Monday, what's going to happen? Again, I'll get my first clue when I see the media schedule and who they're planning to have sit at the podium and in what order and whether they're together or they're separate. I think they might be separate, which will tell you, kind of give you an idea of how things might be, heading. All right, coming up next, speaking of quarterbacks, what about this trade suggestion for JJ McCarthy? I'm going to talk about that with y'all right after this. Hey, Giant fans, it's playoff time. And if you're like me, you want to make the most out of these final weeks of football action. That's where Prize Picks comes in. If you love football and you want a chance to win real money while watching the games, Prize Picks is the place for you. It's the best way to turn your sports opinions into cash with daily fantasy player projections. With Prize Picks, you simply pick more or less on players' stats like total passing yards or rushing touchdowns, and for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your money. You can make your picks in as little as 60 seconds. And whether you're looking for a flex play to boost your payout or you want to cash out quickly, Prize Picks has you covered. With over 10 million members and billions in winnings, it's clear that people are loving this platform. It's so easy to use and the payouts are so fast. Seriously, you can get paid in as little as 15 minutes when your picks hit. Plus, the weekly promos like Taco Tuesday discounts add even more value to your lineups. And here's a special offer for Locked On NFL listeners. Download the app today, use the promo code Locked On NFL, and get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's Prize Picks. Run your game. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. And coming up next week, I don't think I'm going to spend a whole lot of time talking about the Eagles Giants game. I might talk about some of the positives, stuff they can build on, but I'm not really going to go into, like the breakdown, the stats and all that stuff, because at this point, does it really matter? But so what I'll do is I'll tape that show on Sunday to run. And then Monday is going to be the big one. All right. Monday is baggy day. So I'm sure there's going to be loads to talk about. Again, I don't know if Brian Dable and Joe Shane are going to speak on Monday. Once I find out, obviously I'll be able to, plan accordingly. But basically, all next week is going to be spent wrapping things up and starting to look ahead and just putting the horrible 2024 season behind us, which can't happen soon enough. So, anyway, let's talk about the quarterback situation, which is going to be a frequent topic here on this show. Now, Adam Schefter recently did a podcast, I think, for ESPN Radio, and he suggested that teams are going to be interested in potentially trading for J.J. McCarthy at the Minnesota Vikings if he is made available. Okay. And one of the teams, obviously, would be the Giants. Now, right off the bat, folks, I'm not buying it. All right. Schefter's usually spot on with stuff. I think he's just, throwing darts in the dark here. Why would the Giants go and trade draft assets for a guy that they passed on? They had an opportunity to draft J.J. McCarthy. They did not. Now, before you say, well, they weren't going to draft him 6th overall. Well, yeah, if they wanted him badly enough, don't you think they could have traded down a little bit to get him? So why would they want to trade to get this guy? It makes zero sense. Zero. Especially if you consider that, not only did they pass on McCarthy, but the guy's coming off knee surgery. All right. Now, he might very well be a really good quarterback in the NFL. Do you want to take that chance in using him as your bridge guy, not really knowing how he's come along, not really seeing much of him at the NFL level? Do you really want to take that chance when you're trying to fix this franchise? It doesn't make sense. It really doesn't. And I'm not trying to slam J.J. McCarthy. Again, he could very well turn out to be a really, really good quarterback. But this team cannot take that chance, not given how the last few years have gone. Okay? And plus, I'm not so sure the Vikings are going to make him available. Who's to say that the Vikings won't re-sign Sam Darnold? Who's to say that even if Sam Darnold moves on, maybe the Vikings will start our old friend Daniel Jones? So I just think this whole idea of of J.J. McCarthy to the Giants as a possibility, I'm not buying it, not for a minute here. And, everybody's entitled to their opinion. And again, I respect Schefter for his opinions, but I think he's off on this one significantly. So that being said, where did the Giants go? Do they draft? Well, that would be the clear answer, right? Shador or Cam. You would think that would be the way to go. I think it could still be the way to go. Now, I've started doing some work on the quarterbacks. I know somebody on YouTube said to me, oh, you just watching film or you're just following the narrative that's out there. I'm watching film, guys. All right. I'm looking at quarterbacks. I'm also talking to scouts. And I'm telling you, many of the people that I've spoken to have all agreed that if you were to put Sanders and Cam Ward in last year's class, they probably would not be like top 5. So I don't think I'm telling you anything y'all already know, but I'm just putting that out there. All right. Now, that being said, what do the Giants do at quarterback? My opinion, they're going to get a bridge. They have to get a bridge. And no, I'm not talking necessarily about Drew Lock. I'm not necessarily talking about Tommy DeVito. I don't think DeVito is the bridge guy. All right. Lock, I'm not so sure they keep him as the bridge guy. I'm not sure Lock is going to want to stay as a bridge guy. So, 2 guys that I think you keep an eye on, possibly as bridge guys, Jimmy Garoppolo, who's going to get a start this weekend for the Rams, and Carson Wentz, who I believe is going to get a start this weekend for the Chiefs. Those are the two guys I would keep an eye on as a possible bridge solution. Now, I want to make it clear, I don't think that they are the long-term answer, but I think ultimately the Giants they're going to need to draft their franchise quarterback. But just as was the case last year, I think if this current regime comes back, and I believe that that's a very good possibility, you don't force a pick just because, oh my God, we didn't take a quarterback last year. Now we're kind of screwed. We're in quarterback hell. So now we got to force a pick. That is the worst thing this team could do. You get a bridge, and if you have to have them for 2 or 3 years under contract until you can find the right rookie, or if you find the right rookie this year, get that kid ready to play. Don't throw him to the wolves right away. Giants have a pretty tough schedule coming up, or a schedule of opponents, I should say, just their home schedule alone. All right, I think they're going to see the Chiefs, for example. They're going to see a bunch of playoff teams. So, I know there's the old baptism under fire belief, but I think if you want to make sure that you're doing right by whichever young quarterback you do bring in, you make sure you do it the right way. You don't throw them into the deep end of the pool until you have your O-line set up, until you've allowed him to acclimate. I mean, because by rushing him, I mean, we saw what happened when they rushed Daniel Jones into the lineup, right? Took them 6 years, almost 6 years to figure it out, but we saw what happened. Don't make that same mistake. Get a bridge guy in here. Let him do the heavy lifting, which, by the way, was the plan, I should add. Last year, had the Giants been able to trade up to get a quarterback, right? That was the plan. Let Daniel Jones be the bridge guy. Then after this year, bye-bye. That was the plan, right? It didn't work out that way, but that's what they were intending. And we learned that on Hard Knocks, folks. I'm not just saying that. It was kind of proven on Hard Knocks, because you don't talk about, oh, we're going to trade assets to move up if you're not thinking long term. So, again, regarding the quarterback and which one they're going to take, a lot of that's also going to depend on if Dable stays. Which one does he like? I think once we have that answer, then we can kind of do a little bit deeper of a dive, if you will. And I will have scouts on the podcasts throughout the off season. Obviously, we'll talk about that. We'll get some different opinions. I'll give you my opinion on all that stuff. But the quarterback situation is still a long way off from being settled, but it's a top priority, goes without saying, for this team in 2025. All right, coming up next, we're going to wrap things up with a few locker room tidbits, nuggets, whatever you want to call them. That's coming up right after this. Hey, Giant fans, get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if they win. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the very same page where you place your bets. Visit FanDuel.com to get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. And before I get into this last segment, a couple of quick things. I just wanted to give a shout out to Darius Slayton. Darius Slayton was this year's New York Giants PFWA chapter George Young, Ernie Accorsi Media Good Guy Award winner. And that's an award that the Giants Pro Football Writers chapter, every year we vote on that. Darius Slayton has just been an utmost professional. He's been that way ever since he came here. But really, win or lose, whether he's had a good game or a bad game, throughout the locker room, every day, every time there's access, Darius Slayton, always out there, always professional, always giving you the best answers, not these one-liners or snippy answers, just a truly, truly good guy, very worthy of the award, in my opinion. He got my vote. I mean, to me, it was a no-brainer. And that's not to say that there aren't other guys in that locker room who are cooperative and who give the same effort. But Darius, in my opinion, really deserved that award. So congratulations to him. And also, I want to congratulate my soon to be former colleague because he's retiring, Tom Canavan of the Associated Press. Tom Canavan, over 40 years with the Associated Press. Um, his last day is Friday, actually, today, if you're watching this on Friday. And just really, Tom became a really good friend of mine. When I first started out on the beat, he and Ernie Palladino, God rest his soul, uh, were two of the first people I met, two of the first friends I made amongst the beat writers. And Tom has just been a tremendous friend to me. And it's funny how, as the years went by, initially he would help me out when I was a young writer starting out, and then tables kind of turned a little bit where we would bounce ideas off of each other. And if he got stuck, he'd be like, "Hey, what do you think about this?" And we would bounce ideas off of each other. So congratulations to Tommy on a great, great career. He's going to be missed. I miss him already. It's just not going to be the same. Tommy had that catchphrase or what at the end of every question. So I think I'm going to miss that. But anyway, all right, let's get into the tidbits from the locker room. All right, so just a few little nuggets, if you will, take them for what it's worth. It doesn't mean one thing or another. But I want to start off with Jake Kubas, who I had an opportunity to chat with today. Really nice guy. Actually, I'm going to do an article on Jake Kubas for New York Giants on SI. Jake Kubas, as I suspected, has been getting cross-trained at center. Not a surprise if you consider that Greg Van Roten, who right now is the backup center, even though I think Schlotman was activated, I believe, Austin Schlotman, but I have a gut feeling that moving forward, I could see the Giants, if they don't re-sign Greg Van Roten, and I'm not so sure that they will, I wouldn't be surprised if Jake Kubas competes next year to be the backup center. I think that would make sense, actually, and I think he would be pretty good at it. He seems to like the position. He's still learning it. The command, the line calls, and all that stuff. But he's a smart kid, and he's played decently at the guard position. So something to keep an eye on for next year. Now, I did not get a chance to see Evan Neal. I hope to see Evan Neal on Monday, but I'd be curious to know if he's gotten any reps at guard. I would not be shocked if he has, right? Because again, next year the Giants are going to need to shuffle that offensive line. You figure, you know, Andrew Thomas, Jermaine Illuminor should be your tackles. John Michael Schmitz should be the center. John Runyon Jr. will probably be one of the guards. And then it could come down to, either Jake Kubas or Evan Neal if Evan Neal is moved inside the guard. So that's going to be something, an early preview battle I suspect is coming down the pipe. Spoke with Darius Muasso, really nice kid, by the way. Absolutely love him. And he told me that he had an opportunity to wear the green dot this week, which I'm sure a lot of you guys knew. The green dot in the helmet means that he had the radio in the helmet. So with Micah McFadden inactive, Bobby Okereke inactive, Tyler Nubin inactive, or I should say all of them, Okereke on IR, Nubin on IR, McFadden inactive, I should have said. So Wasso was trusted with that role. And he did a pretty good job of it, if you think about it. I mean, look at how well the defense played. And I was kind of teasing him with that. I said, so you're the reason why the defense looks so good. And he was like, no. It was I just had this much a little part of it. So really a very modest kid, a young man. But he's a guy to keep an eye on, to considering that he was a guy that, if I'm being honest with you, I didn't know if he would even make the roster. I figured, okay, another special teamers. They've got a ton of them. Maybe he's practice squad. To see him come on the way he has, very rewarding. It's always rewarding. And I'm so happy to have to admit when I'm wrong on a guy like that. Just like I'm happy to admit that I was wrong on Drew Phillips when I questioned why the heck were they doing, why did they pick him? So yes, folks, even I am wrong sometimes, and I'm not afraid to admit it. All right. So Darius Moasso, again, I don't think Micah McFadden is going to play this weekend. He still has the neck injury, can't practice. You'll see Moasso, and he'll probably be the one orchestrating the defense again. So that'll be interesting to watch as well. The other guys I chatted with, and I'm so sorry I didn't get to him earlier in the year because he's a really good guy to chat with, is Amir Smith Marset. Super guy. Newark's own Amir Smith Marset. And of course, the interest in him was, and not just by me, but also by other reporters, this week's Special Teams Player of the Week honoree at the NFC Special Teams Player of the Week honoree, and for the kickoff return for a touchdown. And Smith Marset, I think, has kind of put Gunnar Olszewski out of the picture for next year, which is, I feel bad for Gunnar because you never want to see a guy lose his job because of injury, get Wally pipped, so to speak. But I think that's kind of what happened. But here's the thing with Smith Marset. Smith Marset is only signed for 1 year. This is kind of what we call a show me deal. And I asked him, I said, hey, here you are, you're playing for your hometown team. Okay, you got your family right here in your backyard, literally. What are the odds you come back next year? Now, most players would say, we'll just see how it happens and whatnot. But surprisingly, or maybe not so much surprisingly, Smith Marset gave me a really honest answer. And he said, look, I'd love to come back here. He says, this is great. This is a great organization. He says, but you know what? He goes, I'm so much more than just a return specialist. I'm a receiver. I want to show that I can be a receiver. I want that opportunity. He says, I don't need to be, the number one guy or even the number two guy. He says, I'm not a slot guy, but I want to show that I can contribute. So it's interesting because I said to him, well, do you think you didn't get that opportunity because you came in after training camp? And I said, this offense I've heard is really, really difficult to learn. And he kind of just chuckled and he said to me, you're not kidding. He said, it is one of the most difficult offenses I've ever had to learn. He says, and I've learned a few. He said, there's so many moving parts. So he said, that's probably it. He says, I'm still learning it on the fly. I think, with an off season and, the OTAs and all that stuff in training camp, he says, I think I can get it down. He says, because it's starting to make sense for me. But he said, I do come back here. He says, I'd really, really like that opportunity to show that I could be more than just a return specialist. So I mentioned that because, again, not to look too far ahead because we're going to do a show on all this stuff coming up, down the line. But I got to wonder, Darius Slayton, I don't think is going to be back next year. I think Darius Slayton is going to get paid a lot more than what the Giants might be willing to pay him to keep him. So that means your receiver 2 is going to be open. Now, can Jalen Hyatt fill that role? He's been a big mystery this year, right? He doesn't get on the field as often. And I'm really not sure why. Is it because he doesn't understand the playbook? Is it because he's just so thin that they're afraid to put him out there? I don't know the answer to that. I've been trying to find out. I haven't gotten a straight answer from anybody. Can Smith Marset be that guy? I don't know. We have to see more of him because as I've told you, during the season, we don't get to see the full practices. So I can't sit there and say, okay, Smith Marset looks, has run this route well or that. I haven't seen it in this offense. But that's going to be something to keep an eye on if he is back next year. So, and there's no reason why, if he does come back, there's no reason why he can't be, a receiver and a return specialist for the team if that's what they need him to do. So we'll see. Again, I'm going to do a show on the pending free agents. I mean, so many different topics we're going to be doing here on Locked On Giants. I mean, we're not stopping even though the season ends Sunday. We're going to still be 5 days a week. And I also hope to have some guests on for you. And, we'll just keep it rolling. So anyway, those are my little tidbits from the locker room. Hope you enjoyed that. And with that, that's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Giants. Now, again, on Sunday, I'm going to tape a show probably right after the Eagles game or shortly thereafter. But the big show that we want to tune in for is going to be Monday after we get done with Baggy Day, after we get done with hearing from, Shane, if he speaks on Monday, and Dable, if he speaks on Monday. So the plan is for me, as soon as I can get back home to my studio, I will get a podcast together with my thoughts and takeaways on all that stuff. So I hope you will check that out. And thank you, as always, for tuning in to the Locked On Giants podcast. Thank you for all your support this year. I know it's been a rough year, but hopefully some of these shows have been therapeutic for you. Giant fans, I will see you on Monday. Have a good weekend, everybody.